Hello. Welcome. It is time for another video. Hopefully, I already created a slide for this, or rather, an image. Today's video is on what is a woman, with a little byline that says sports, biology, and more. Originally, this was a video intended to talk about the whole concept of how conservatives in particular tend to like to say that men are trying to invade women's sports when they're talking about trans and intersex people. But I realized I need to talk a lot about things that are not sports before we can even get to talking about why that's absurd in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I figure we have to start at the top. So, what is a woman? I know a lot of conservatives have very strange definitions. The president here in the US recently made his own definitions, which, depending on how you interpret the language used, either means none of us have any gender, or that we're all women, because literally the biological processes don't work the way described in the definitions. So, obviously not a valid definition, even if he can force the government to use that definition when it comes to the different departments under his control. There is no basis for this type of definition. It's a long story with them, though, how you try to define what a woman is. There's a lot of reasons for this, but for many years now, they've been saying that left-leaning people cannot describe what a woman is. Well, there's a reason for that. It's hard. Damn hard. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a lesson in biology. This that you can maybe sort of see at the moment is from a professor of biology. She happens to be a woman, but she talks about how defining biological sex seems really simple, but it's not. It's not at all. So, let me just read this. If you know a bit about biology, you will probably say that biological sex is caused by chromosomes. XX in your female, XY in your male. This is chromosomal sex. But is it biological sex? Well, turns out there is only one gene on the Y chromosome that really matters to sex. It's called the SRY gene. During human embryonic development, the SRY protein turns on male-associated genes. I'm gonna hop out of reading this for a second and sort of describe what that actually means. Biologically, before that gene expresses itself and turns on the right proteins, we're effectively biologically female. However, this is the point where primary sexual characteristics form. YouTube won't let me talk about those, per se, beyond that term. But basically, that's the junk in your pants. Whichever way it leans is what that process is. There's some exception to that, but let's get back to the text. So, having an SRY gene makes you genetically male, but is this biological sex? Sometimes that SRY pops off the Y chromosome and over to an X chromosome. Surprise! Now you've got an X with an SRY and a Y without an SRY. What does this mean? A Y with no SRY means physically you're female, chromosomally you're male, you're XY. Genetically you're female, no SRY. An X with an SRY means you're physically male, chromosomally female, XX, and genetically male, SRY. But biological sex is simple. There must be another answer. Sex-related genes ultimately turn on hormones in specific areas of the body, and reception of those hormones by cells throughout the body. Is this the root of biological sex? Hormonal male means you produce normal levels of male-associated hormones. By the way, normal is in quotation marks, and there's a reason for that. Except some percentage of females will have higher levels of male hormones than some percentage of males, and vice versa, female hormones in men. And if you're developing, your body may not produce enough hormones for your genetic sex, leading you to be genetically male or female, chromosomally male or female, hormonally non-binary, and physically non-binary. Well, except cells have something to say about this. Maybe cells are the answer to biological sex, right? Cells have receptors that hear the signal from sex hormones. But sometimes those receptors don't work. Like a mobile phone that's on Do Not Disturb. Call and call. They will not answer. What does this all mean? It means you may be genetically male or female, chromosomally male or female, hormonally male, female, non-binary, with cells that may or may not hear the male, female, and non-binary call. And all this leading to a body that can be male, non-binary, or female. Try out some combinations for yourself. Notice how confusing it gets. Can you point out to what absolute cause of biological sex is? Is it fair to judge people by it? Of course, you could try appealing to the numbers. Most people are either male or female, you say. Except that as a biology professor, I will tell you, the reason I don't have my students look at their own chromosomes in class, this is called a karyotype, by the way, it's because people could learn that their chromosomal sex doesn't match their physical sex. And learning that in the middle of a 10-point assignment is just not the time. Biological sex is complicated. Before you discriminate against someone on the basis of biological sex and identity, ask yourself, have you seen your chromosomes? Do you know the genes of the people you love? The hormones of the people you work with? The state of their cells? Since the answer will obviously be no, please be kind. Respect people's right to tell you who they are. And remember that you don't have all the answers. Again, biology is complicated. Kindness and respect don't have to be. There's also a note here. Biological classifications exist. XX, XY, XXY, XXYY, and all manner of variation which is why sex isn't classified as binary. You can't have a binary classification system with more than 2 configurations, even if 2 of those configurations are more common than the others. And with the note, biology is a shit show. Because frankly it is. It is. So, this is why actually answering what is a woman is so hard. Most people can't do it. I mean, people will say they can do it, but if they do, they're talking out their ass. Because they can't answer that. You've just seen. We literally can't answer that. I mean, not without knowing 12 different things about a person. And even then, that's just the physical aspect of a person. As a trans person myself, I don't know my chromosomes. In a lot of parts of the world, you do have to get a karyotype before you can start HRT. For a number of reasons, that is not the case typically in the US. The most common reason people in the US get a karyotype is that they're trying to conceive children or they're pregnant. In both cases, it is very common to get a karyotype, but only about 30% of the population has any clue. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I personally have tried to get a karyotype just because I'm curious. I'm actually finding it really hard to get anyone to approve what could be done in a biology classroom in 10 minutes. Because it's a blood test, and well, at least usually it's a blood test. You just take a little sample of your blood. It doesn't happen to be the only way to do it, but it's the common way. You could literally prick your finger, and with the right microscope, you could do it yourself. You might need a few tools. I have not tried to do a karyotype myself, but I do know that you can do it in a classroom. This is the start of why we can't decide that sort of thing. Now, not every trans person is going to be someone that either chromosomally or genetically lines up with one gender or the other. I mean, without even adding in non-binary people, what we feel is not specifically tied to chromosomes or genetics. A lot of gender identification and gender identity doesn't fit in a neat little box. Gender is a construct in the first place. To some degree, it lines up to biology, at least in some ways. But culture is what shapes gender roles, and our attempt to fit into those gender roles is where we get people who don't line up, which can be genetic. All those XXY, XXYY, and other variations chromosomally, those are usually people that we would consider to be intersex. Some of those are genetic rather than chromosomal, and I'm not going to go too far into intersex reality currently. But I will toss in some statistics here. These statistics sometimes are why conservative people think that being trans is something that is being, like, spread, like some sort of disease. Ah, this lines up because if you look generationally at the percentage of people in the population that are trans in one type or another, the youngest generation is at about 5%. Uh, the older generations are sometimes under 1%. That's a pretty big gap. But what a lot of people don't seem to consider is that, especially for older people, a lot of us didn't understand what being trans was. I mean, we knew we were different, usually. There are some people in some really deep levels of denial. But a lot of us didn't know or understand or have access to the right information to come to a decision. Also, with the suicide rates of trans people being at or higher than those for people who have been soldiers in war, a lot of us just don't make it to be old enough to be in that generation and identify correctly. For a lot of reasons. I'm not going to get into those right now. But this is why it looks to some people like more people now are trans than ever before. Young people have the best chance of knowing who and what they are than any time in recent history. So this is going to change and affect the numbers. This is also the reason why I say, even though currently the best numbers I've seen suggest that about 2% of the population is intersex and about 1.7% of the population in total are trans. There's wild variation in some of the ways people get numbers. So, I don't necessarily trust a lot of the numbers out there, but the most concise ones I have line up like that. By the way, there is some overlap. Some people who find out they are intersex are trans, or at least they considered themselves to be trans before knowing they were intersex. This is how difficult this whole subject is. So, that doesn't mean that, like, 4% of the total population are one or the other. That means that those two groups have those numbers, and some members could be in both those groups. So, things get really messy when you start looking at numbers. Now, I have more to talk about, and I'm going to link this down below. This is the Gender Dysphoria Bible. It is a living document contributed to by a whole community as a resource for ourselves to be able to document things. We have, or at least some of us, have gotten together to create this document. It's updated all the time, especially as more, like, understanding comes to things. Why I want to use it today, though, is what they call estrogenic second puberty. This, for trans women and trans feminine people in general, this describes the process and what happens on HRT. I'll even refer back to myself here, because that's something I can definitely talk on from experience. Obviously, these are all secondary sex characteristics. The first thing they talk about is breast growth. That is a long process. Just like cisgendered women don't, develop breasts overnight. Well, I have heard some stories about people who did, in fact, develop very quickly, but not overnight. I also have heard stories from trans women that pretty much got close to developing overnight. Not my experience. Not my experience. I wish. It is definitely a thing. So, we talked a little bit ago about how cells have to have the uptake of hormones to develop. I've talked to a couple of trans women who basically didn't have breast development. That is because in them, those particular cells just don't seem to have been able to get the message from hormones. Confusing for a few of them, because in some cases they've been on hormones long enough to have bottom surgery, and it really plays with your mind if that does not develop. Skin softening. Skin softening is something I saw very quickly. My skin was never super rough, but the texturing and the thickness of the skin tends to be slightly different between the genders. In a broad sense. And by that I mean a broad hormonal sense. Just to further explain that. Increased flexibility. I can't tell you if this is true or not. Slimmer hands and wrists. I know very slowly my hands have slimmed down a little bit. Slightly. I have a condition I have talked about before called lymphedema, and that affects how do I want to put it? The waste retention in my cells is probably the best way I can describe that. So I tend to be slightly and only in my hands and my feet, but in those areas, I tend to be puffier than I would like. I would like really slim fingers. Sorry. Unless someone finds a cure for lymphedema, that may never be. Smaller feet. So, I see this Uh, I haven't even been on hormones for a year, and my feet are at least half a size smaller than they used to be. Uh, I'm actually looking at having to get new shoes just because smaller feet. And it's not even been a year, so I'm expecting them to shrink even more. The reason for this is about ligaments and cartilage in the foot. Uh, when you're testosterone dominant, those have increased blood flow and retention of fluid. So they tend to be bigger. That's one reason men tend to have larger feet than women. But yeah, dropping a shoe size or two is kind of normal on HRT. Male to female HRT, obviously. Thinner and softer fingernails. This I can't tell you. I always had really smooth fingernails, and I haven't really noticed any change. I used to actually have my fingernails break all the time, but currently I have long fingernails, and only one has managed to break, which that threw me for a loop because they look more like my hands now than they've ever looked to me before. Which may sound really strange to you if you're cisgendered, but yeah, it's a thing. Reduced body hair. I have not noticeably noticed this. Maybe it's a thing. Maybe. I couldn't tell you. It happens with some people and not others. Genetics play a major role in that. Also, changes in body temperature placement. Women tend to have warmer core temperatures, but lower surface temperatures. This is why a lot of women talk about getting cold feet and being colder in a room than a guy would. Changes in perspiration patterns. Yes. How you sweat changes. Reduction and or change of body odor. Yes, this totally is a thing. I think it goes along with perspiration patterns. Yeah, but you will definitely smell different. Now, here's one that affects sports. This one is titled Reduced Muscle Mass. So, androgens, which includes testosterone, stimulate muscle growth, which is why anabolic steroids are a thing. People who are on androgens, either naturally or artificially, have more muscle mass and develop muscle quicker, particularly in the upper body. Not having androgens, not having testosterone basically, or having very low, female levels of testosterone means that you develop muscle mass slower, and there's actually a certain amount of atrophy that can happen in the existing muscle mass. So it's both harder to gain muscle, and muscle you did have can be lost. Now, this is particularly important to that sports argument. If someone started out at birth being considered a male and goes through HRT, even a few months in, there is a radical difference in the sort of muscle development that you can have. If conservative people were really worried about men in women's sports, they would have no issues with starting teenagers on HRT. I'm going to detour a little bit because it's important right here. If you're on puberty blockers, which there are different cocktails for that, but some of them are very similar to what you might take to block androgen production when you're on HRT. With that, there's a 97% chance that someone who's on puberty blockers, who's gone through all sorts of therapy to have to even get to that point, that they're going to continue on to getting HRT. 97%. That is higher than all sorts of medical treatments. It is one of the highest continuation rates for any form of medical treatment. So, I've just told you you need androgens to develop greater muscle mass. Being on puberty blockers will block development of large amounts of androgens. So, anyone on puberty blockers is hormonally a woman, not in development of secondary sex characteristics, but in the way things like muscle mass work. You don't have those androgens, you don't develop increased muscle mass. It just doesn't happen. So, before puberty, boys and girls, as far as these sorts of things like muscle mass goes, basically identical. There's a very small difference, and part of that comes into how girls tend to have growth spurts before boys do. So girls will actually usually be taller at a certain age pre-puberty than guys will, or rather boys. So they're actually usually taller, and being taller actually have more total muscle mass. Not by a lot, but by a small amount. It's proportional, so it's due to their size. That never factors into any considerations of how this works with like conservative people trying to ban, or even just gender sports. There are plenty of kids' sports where the reason we gender them has nothing to do about performance of the athletes in question. We even gender things like chess. And the reason we do that isn't because there's some huge difference in chess capability between women and men. No, The difference is because women started to win in games against men. That's it. That's the whole reason. uh, that bothered some people. So, a lot of games were quickly segregated into men's and women's categories. So, I'm going to keep reading these. Not all are important to the sports theme that we're going to talk about and have been talking about on and off when it comes up. But I want to get through this list because these things are things that women go through during puberty as well, in many cases. Now, some of these, because we start off closer gendered together, because secondary characteristics don't vary much until puberty. So, there's less variance that has to be done for some forms of female puberty because it's closer to where you started. So you don't necessarily see some of these changes. Some, though, you definitely do. Fat redistribution and feminine proportions. Where the genders tend to put fat is in slightly different places. The women tend to get it in the thighs, butt, and hips. Also, the booba. I know I correctly referred to them before, but yeah, it feels awkward sometimes. But where men tend to get it most, it's slightly different, and you start to slowly see that. How much development we get as trans women is better the younger, and so therefore the less male puberty you had to go through. It's not usually talked about, but puberty actually lasts a lot longer than we tend to think. Men often can see puberty continuing until like the late 20s, even sometimes early 30s. I know people that couldn't like grow a beard until about like 27. They could sort of, parts of it, but not a full beard until they got to 27. So, yeah. We don't usually think of that, and these sorts of like fat redistribution things, those take a very, very long time. Usually, we suggest to people that they look at 5 to 7 years before you tend to see the full effects. Again, younger, the better when it comes to those sorts of things. Because I started much later than many people, I may not ever completely see those sorts of changes. Also, the next century, facial feature changes. The lips and upper cheeks tend to puff up. The neck, chin, and jawline tend to thin out. The brow and upper eyelids lift, exposing more eyeball, as awkward as that sounds. Um, Even the shape of the eyeball can slightly change. Um, this can also actually affect your vision. Uh, I expect at some point I'm going to need a new pair of glasses, just because it's very common. Uh, Having less testosterone causes pigmentation in the iris to fade. So, uh, my eyes actually will probably be much lighter eventually. How much? Who knows? Who knows? It's all sort of up in the air. Just like puberty in general, this is the same way. Uh, Changes the scalp hair. Removal of androgens and blood flow to the scalp increases. This can actually reverse male pattern baldness in some people, and can return hairline and fill in bald spots. Uh, I never had that problem anyways, so yay me. Um, Hair tends to become thicker and the follicles grow stronger, allowing hair to grow to longer lengths. Um, or at least that's what this says. I know men with fairly long hair, so I I don't know how pronounced that actually is. There's usually a thickening and a and curliness may become more pronounced. Personally, I have really straight hair. Uh, Extremely straight hair. Uh, so, I don't know how close I can get to my Nakami haircut here. Uh, I have a, like, mid-level type of curl on the end of my hair in my avatar. If I tease my hair enough, maybe I can get it to do that. I'm not sure that will ever happen. We'll see. We'll see. One day, when I'm comfortable enough to not use my avatar, I will try to dress in a full Nakami outfit, hair and all. I'll try to match the outfit too. That's probably going to be a bit. All right. Anterior pelvic tips. So, due to the muscular atrophies, the ligament flexibility increases, and weight shifts lower on the body, the orientation of the pelvic bone in relation to the spine and femurs rotates forward. Not by very much. It's only about 10 to 20 degrees. But that can be enough to change the alignment of the spine and hips, increasing the arch of the back and causing the buttocks to jut out more. This is one reason why, even if you don't try, you might start walking more feminine. This is the sort of change that women have during puberty, basically. They don't notice a difference in height, but trans women can lose 1 to 2 inches in height. That's about 2 to 5 centimeters, depending. I have not tried to measure my height in a while, but it's totally possible at some point that I may get shorter. Obviously, this is not much. But trans women who are very tall often hope that this happens to them. And by the way, this is not the same as hip rotation that occurs in regular female puberty. That's actually a matter of the shape of the pelvic bone itself. If you're young enough, that can actually still occur to you during HRT. But yeah, even if I live to be 80, I could totally expect that it might occur. There was a case in 2017 of an 80-year-old trans woman who reported that after 30 years on HRT, her doctor observed changes in her pelvis consistent with female hip rotation. So, it's a possibility. But bone changes take a very, very long time. To go back to the sports thing, in adults, this might mean that some men who, as adults, identify as trans women might be a bit taller, but they may not always necessarily be that much taller. And while the average height between men and women is different, and I'll give you a real world example of this. I was actually at a store a little bit ago, and the woman in line in front of me was at least a good 2 or 3 inches taller than me, which makes her at least 6 foot. Theoretically, I'm 5'10". Well, at least the last time anyone checked, I was 5'10". So, yeah, she's got to be like 6 foot. So height advantage is not necessarily a thing that guys are just gonna have. We tend to think men are always taller, but that's not always true. There are plenty of tall women. Reduced tolerance to caffeine, alcohol, and psychotropics. I'm not going into why those happen, but yeah, it's a thing. Caffeine has more of an effect on me now than it did pre-HRT. I used to be able to basically shrug off things like caffeine. I haven't tried alcohol since being on HRT. I just don't tend to drink. But that definitely, I've seen some changes. Mental changes is listed here. But it's not so much mental changes in usually big ways. For us who are trans, a lot of those come down to things that, like, a lot of us do a lot of depersonalization and derealization, and things like anxiety and depression. Those will feel better because not necessarily the HRT are somehow changing this, but the changes factored into HRT have an effect. They also talk about some other things I'm not going to go into too much. Like changes in symptoms if you have ADHD, emotional expansion, personally, I was always very emotional and have a lot of empathy for other people. Uh, so my emotional quotient was always pretty high. Uh, but theoretically, on average, women usually have an emotional quotient that's higher than men. So, this can be a change. Fluctuations in estrogen levels can also cause mood swings. Uh, there's a note here that some of this uh, can result in things that might be considered PMS rage and unexplained crying happens, is a note in there. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Uh, Appetites. I have definitely seen this. Generally, I'm not as hungry as I was pre-transition. Um, that is actually a noted potential change with HRT. I have heard a few cases of the reverse where you end up wanting to eat more. I don't know what to say about that, but both things seem to be something that can happen. Sleep patterns shift. Extroversion. I've always been kind of an introvert, and a need to be sociable is something I've always had, and I don't think has changed too much. But I do definitely get moods where I need more emotional social contact. Um, Sensory enhancements. Uh, Improved sense of smell, improved color perception, improved spatial awareness, changes in perception of taste. I haven't seen the last one, or the third one, really. I'm not sure about color perception. Sense of smell, yes. Almost immediately. Going to apply to sports as well. Spatial shift. And what it refers to as reduced confidence. Because of a lot of other changes, our sense of space can actually shift. It tends to make us clumsier for a while at least, as the changes happen. This can actually make us worse at sports. Yeah, because things are just different. Very different. So yeah, the next section I am totally skipping. You can look up genital changes. I am also not gonna talk about the last one. That's for a very different video. So, with all those notes, you may notice that hormonally, if you're a woman, then hormonally you're a woman. Anyone taking HRT is going to see the same sorts of changes that women go through in puberty. Not all of them immediately or quickly. quickly, but it's gonna happen. So let's get back to sports for a little bit, because this is gonna be the quick part. So after all that, what is our answer to sports? Well, if you take two athletes who one starts to transition and the other is a cisgendered woman beforehand, or always, and you compare them to the trans woman, uh, the trans woman might start at a higher point due to things like that increased muscle mass that men tend to have. They might have a slight height advantage, but the longer that they're on HRT, the more in line the trans woman gets to the same expectation as the cisgendered woman. It's not immediate. I'm not gonna suggest it's immediate. But the longer it happens, the closer the two are gonna perform. Pete, we're talking about two people in a similar physical condition before one starts to transition. There are not very many high-level trans athletes. In the US, in the NCAA, there were less than 10 trans women. That's a program that has over 500,000 athletes in it. So, 10 out of 500,000. Trans women competing in adult professional sports are at about the same numbers. I know, and there's a great video that I will link about the crap out there with numbers suggesting all the medals that cisgendered women have lost to trans women. There's a great video, like I said, that I'll link in the description for this video, that talks specifically about how crap those numbers are and why they're crap. I'm not going to get into it here, but they include a lot of things that are not sports as we think of them. Darts are in there. Chess is in there. Yeah, these aren't inherently gendered things in a lot of cases. And that makes up a very high percentage of what goes into that, which is why the numbers are such crap. Among high-level athletes, the ones who are trans usually perform worse than cisgendered women who have chromosomal or genetic or hormonal differences than most of their colleagues. Unfortunately, a lot of cisgendered women who have some of those conditions have a lot of issues with the sports community. There are several cisgendered women who are professional athletes with conditions that give them higher than usual testosterone, for instance. Several high echelon runners have had conditions like that. A lot of times they've had problems with people considering them to be men. They're cisgendered women. They have all the body parts one would expect of a cisgendered woman. But because they have higher than usual testosterone, they get a lot of pushback. Uh, Another great example was a cisgendered woman at the Olympics last year. She got a lot of hate online for being a trans woman, and at least initially, one of her competitors complained that she was a trans woman. Was not true. No one seemed to care. So, a lot of this thought that men competing in women's sports is such a big thing because of a small number of trans women is more about targeting cisgendered women who don't fit the norm in the same way that they think trans women don't. Women are just women. Women compete in women's sports. I don't know why this should be hard. That's it. That's the video. I'm done. Let's go home. All right? Yeah, I think we've answered this now. Women are women.